Relationship series, huh? Filled out. That's nice. People were like, hey, there's this guy that walks by here every week, and I just want to give him a hot dog. Like every time. No, let him go for now. Let's not tackle people, Piper. That feels weird. Feels weird. Well, yeah, you never. That's true. That's just we gotta put some hooks out in the waters, maybe. I don't know. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Brent. It's great to see that we're getting new people every week. That's just really cool. Love having you here. Just want to continue to reiterate what Mike said. We are all about helping people know and follow Jesus. We kind of are a smorgasbord of all of my years of ministry combined with all of our lead team's years of ministry. So if you're like, oh, that looks kind of familiar to a church I used to go to, well, I probably was a pastor there at one point in my life, or somebody was there once. So we try our best to just bring the gospel forward. And today we're talking about relationships. And so when we talk about relationships in the new series, it's kind of funny because you name it iMarriage and everybody automatically thinks this is a relationship series about how to be married better. And we're going to get into that. But this is why this is so important. Because tonight specifically, I'm going to try my best to engage with you on a couple of truths that I have observed in my life with relationships. And I hope those truths translate and give you an opportunity to grow in your life with relationships. And if you're here and you're single, this is a great series for you because you get the opportunity to do it right the first time. Okay? So if you're here and you're married, this is going to be a great relationship series for you because you get the opportunity to go home and do homework with your spouse. And if you're dating someone, I've been known to break people up, but that's not me. That was not my fault, okay? If you're here and you're dating someone, you might get the opportunity to engage with a new opportunity. You know what I'm saying? Like those are going to be opportunities for us to grow. And I keep saying opportunity. I don't know why. But the whole point here is this whole relationship series is about how do we engage with each other? How do we engage with each other when it's like, hey, girl, what you up to? You know, what's your number? Like, can I get it? And how do you engage with someone that you've been married to for, let's call it 10 plus years, 20 plus years, maybe some 30 plus years, a couple more? I was trying to be generous. Nah, we'll keep it at 30. 40? Almost 50 years? All right, so you all want to teach then? Yeah. You got it. I'll sit down. You teach this series. No, that's great. When we get to the marriage part, I'll get you up here. It'll be great. That's what we're talking about in this series. And the series itself is called iMarriage because we've got this big I that we bring to the table of every relationship that we have. And so I'm going to hopefully help you out with that. Now, I don't know if you know this or not, but how many of you have experienced life? Throw your hands in the air. Don't be shy. Come on. More than you're here and living and breathing. It should be in the air. How many of you have experienced life with people? Is it easier to just do life or to do life with people? Yes. Interesting. Life with people would be so much easier if it weren't for people, right? Connie Podesta she was like this motivational speaker. She's the one that's coined with that term. Life with people would be so easy if it weren't for the people. Actually, life would get easier if people didn't come and mess up all my plans. And the reality of this scenario is a lot of us, whether you believe in that or not, everybody at one point in time would be, man, life would be so much easier if everybody thought like, oh yeah, okay, somebody's listening. If everybody just thought like I did, then life would be so much easier. It would also be a lot less coordinated for some of you, okay? If everybody thought like I did, we'd be in t-shirts and gym shorts, and it wouldn't be great, okay? But this is how it is. We all get into this conversation about what would life look like. Matthew, can you grab my water in the back? I can feel it coming. I must be having something good to say tonight. What would life be like if we were in a scenario where everybody who was like us or everybody around us was like us? And what would it look like if those people around you in your life, thanks, dude, I appreciate you. Matthew, everybody, give him a round of applause. He's here all night. What would it look like if the people around us were like us? And there's this situation that happens in life, okay? Because you and I do life with people, and anytime you add people to a conversation, it creates what I like to call a gap. Okay, I didn't name it a gap, that's just what it is, all right? And the conversation we're having tonight is the law of the gaps. Because every person This is my stick figure. He's yelling, "Hey!" Okay. That is not proportionate. That's fine. Hey! Everybody's yelling at each other, and what we're trying to do is cross over a gap. Now, in the middle of the gap, we talked last week that there are two filters. There's the filter going out and the filter going in. Okay? But in this gap sits opinions. Ooh. I've got an opinion. Let me tell it to you. Okay? And in this gap sits a point of view. And you know what's interesting in this gap that also sits is a thing called a worldview. Okay? So in this gap, there's all of these things happening. There's opinions, there's points of view, there's worldview. Worldview is how you see the world, and it's largely how did you grow up? What did you grow up in? What did you grow up believing? Who were your family members? That all infiltrates how you see the world out there. So I have my own point of view, which is how I see the world in this moment. And then I have my worldview, which is kind of how I interact with the world because of how I was raised or how I was given or whatever's happened in my life. This is an interesting part. Excuse me. So the law of the gap is interesting because when we have people in our lives and we have this gap in the middle, this is the thing that makes it difficult for us to be engaged with people. This is why it's so hard. Now, at one point in time, before the fall of man and sin, this gap didn't exist. But the fall of man brought in this gap. There was now tension between human beings. So it wasn't just that I had tension between God and myself. That's not the only thing that happened when man sinned. It was not just that we lost our relationship with God. We lost our relationship with each other, that shalom, that peace. And we also lost our relationship with the ground. You got to work and toil and sweat to get money. You know, it actually doesn't grow on trees. And then we lost our relationship with the community. It's really hard to be in a community, especially when everybody's got an opinion, their own point of view and worldview, and everybody's yelling. And here's the secret. You want to know why this gap is hard? It's because it's incredibly easy for me to be me. Nobody wrote that down. You wrote it down. 2 people wrote that down. It's incredibly easy for Brent to be Brent. Why? Because with Brent comes all of this, and I lived it. But you know what? It's very difficult for Dana to be me. And it's very difficult for Joshua to be me. And for Piper to be me. And it's difficult for me to be them. It's incredibly difficult. And so what happens here is I shout to you, and I say, come to my point of view. Come to my side, and you're like, what are you talking about? There's a gap between us. I can't jump it, and you don't make any sense. And honestly, it just looks crazy over there. I don't want to go. Okay? It's so easy for me to be me. It's so easy for you to be you. And the thing that we find tension in is this law of the gap. And what happens is that ease puts us in a scenario where the gap then creates these 2 pieces of the puzzle, which creates tension in our lives. So the gap itself is filled with opinion. Opinions fill it with tension, and then the tension fills the gap. And then we go one of 2 ways, okay? There's the gap that I like to call the gap of silence. And I'm just going to write this down. Oh, Brent, you spelled it wrong. With an S. Presence. Thank you. Appreciate you out there. I almost put 2 S's. Isn't that crazy? That would have bothered you. That's probably still bothering you, but just don't look at it, okay? Do you want me just to put the other? I can't erase it. It's in there. So there's 2 gaps when this happens when we engage with people. There's the gap of silence, right? And this is what we're going to get after a little bit more. We're going to push in the tension a little bit more because you got a gap there. And what happens in the gap is that you and I, we fill the gap with conversation. We fill the gap with understanding. I get to know you, right? And in the romantic way, you know, it's like, ooh, we stayed up all night. We just chatted, you know. Snow was coming down. It was beautiful. It's like you sleep less and you talk more because you're really, really interested in filling in this gap as quickly as you can. And for some of you, you want to get there as quick as you can so you can get to the altar as quick as you can. So then I can be married. Oh, I made it. And then I'm married, and then a year later, I find that I'm in a gap of silence because we never really actually filled in the gap with anything good. This is why, in the world of theology, in the world of Christianity, I believe, you don't want to fill this with sex because it's not going to stay full. It's an empty cistern. It's a broken cistern, okay? I'm not trying to shame you if you've been here and you've done that. Hey, you just don't want, that's not going to help fill the gap. And what happens is we get into this and we have a gap of silence. And this is the one, I was going to try to say, this is the one that's if you've been married for a while, this seems to be the one. It's like you're home, but you're not home. It's like you're home, but you're working in your brain. And your husband or wife is talking to you and you're just not listening. Or you're just not speaking. There's just this gap of silence where we're just instead of talking and getting to know each other and continuing to fill this gap. Now, this also happens in relationships, just friendships alone. Okay, how many of you had a best friend one year and then the next year it feels like you don't talk anymore? And then we don't talk anymore, and now I'm wondering, do you hate me? And the gap gets bigger because not only did I just include all of my opinions and all of these things, but the crazy part is inside this gap when I'm in one of these scenarios is I also put in this insecurities, and they just bombard the gap, right? It's they clearly hate me because they know that one thing I did in 9th grade. And then you start spiraling. It's I threw away the receipts and now they hate me. And some of you do this at work too, by the way. You get into a spot where you're they're going to fire me because of this. It's well, you work pretty hard and you do a really good job. I don't know why they're going to fire you. It's not really a fireable offense unless you're stealing money from the company, in which case you're out. That's a thing. But we do this. We get our insecurities. We start filling in the gaps because I don't see all of the things in my world. And then this gap of silence, you're not speaking to me. And then we were hanging out for a whole week, and then you went on vacation, and then we don't hang out. It just feels like we don't hang out anymore. And isn't it interesting that your best friends, pay attention to this, your best friends, we're not talking about your relationships because I know you love your husbands and I get it, you love your boo things, but listen, your best friends, the reason they're your best friends is because even in a moment of silence, the insecurities never infiltrate the gap. It's I didn't talk to you for 2 weeks. I talked to you again. It's I never left. Right? I haven't talked to you in 6 months, but man, we get on the phone and it's man, I missed you. Where you been, dude? What have you been up to? Actually, I had one of my best friends call me today out of the blue. We haven't talked since summer, really. And it was he was my college roommate. It was we never stopped talking. You know what I'm saying? It's what is the difference in there? And the biggest thing in there is we fill in the gap. When you fill in the gap with trust, your insecurities have nowhere to play. Now let's go to presence, a misspelled presence, right? So your presence is the other one, right? This idea that when I'm a friend and I'm in your presence, I find that we're really, really close, but then over time or over proximity, we don't have the presence in the same environment, and so our relationship starts to die off. And then what happens is we get to a spot where we're oh my goodness, the gap is going crazy. The gap is getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and I just gotta, and what do you want to do? You want to can we just get together and go get coffee? And then it's awkward for 4 minutes to start because you're what do I actually talk about? Do I actually want to hang out with this person? You know what I'm saying? But this idea of presence is just to have you in my life. And this is where marriages also have some struggle because you're with each other all the time. You forget that you still got to fill in the gaps. And you got to fill in the gaps by trying to see the other person. Instead of shouting across, one of you's got to get down, come around, and go to the other person and say, how can I see you? This isn't about me. Because it's incredibly easy for me to be me when I want to learn more about you. And if you're out there and you're wondering, where are we going with all this? What we're trying to get to is a conversation where we can actually start to look at the gap, the laws of the gap, see the silence and the presence gaps, quit putting our insecurity in there and start throwing trust in there. Because I think, this is where I start preaching, I think the church has done a terrible job at this. And so people don't want to come back to church because I haven't been to church in a long time. And if I walk in and they realize all of the stuff that I've done, my insecurities keeps building a gap. And I feel like I don't belong there. Or you did something and it wasn't a great something, and instead of me stepping toward you saying, hey, I'm dumb too, the church has gone silent on certain things. Instead of the church saying, hey, can we engage with this as human beings, we've elevated people to a level of perfection that shouldn't exist in the world. But for some reason, because you love Jesus, you're supposed to be perfect? That doesn't make any sense. And the crazy part is, nobody's putting that on you but you. You follow Jesus and you think you're supposed to not make mistakes. Like Jesus died for your sin one time, not all the other times that you mess up. And we're talking about this, and we're going to be in Galatians 6 here, and we're going to talk about this because there's one more thing I want to talk about, and it's not very well fleshed out. But bear with me. The other thing that happens in relationships, it's very easy for you to be you, it's very easy for me. This is the craziest part that happens, okay? The crazy part is sometimes you're in a relationship or a friendship and you grow. And you don't grow for the worse, you grow for the better. You actually start growing up and to the right. And what happens is, in that scenario, you start growing up and to the right, and the gap keeps getting bigger. Does that make sense? You're going this way, they're staying here, and this gap gets wider and wider and wider. And here's the crazy part, is because this is the thing that I get a lot. People come to you and they'll say things like, you've changed, man. You're not the same anymore. You're different now. And a lot of times, what that's meant to do is to fish hook you, bring you back, and close the gap. But I want to put out there that maybe it's not so much that you've changed. Maybe it's that they haven't. You see, a lot of times, what I have found in my life is that people will put things on you to bring them closer to themselves. But sometimes you've got to grow so that other people will grow with you. And this is why friendships, people in your life, they're there for a season, they're there for a reason, or they're there forever. And you don't know which one it is, because as you grow, your forevers are going to grow with you. But for the seasons, they ain't coming with you. And for a reason, the reason is probably why you started growing. They made you feel like you wanted to be more. They made you feel like you wanted to do more. They pushed you and they challenged you. And it's a really beautiful spot to be when you have friends like that. Reasons, seasons, and lifetime. And we're in Galatians 6, and this is why I want to get after it a little bit. And we're setting up the series, so if you're like, man, all I know is Brent talked about a gap, and I feel kind of like there's a lot of tension in my life, not a lot of resolution. I hope that's true, because you got to come back for the whole series. When we write a series, we don't write a series as individual sermons. We write a series as a conversation, because it'd be impossible to keep you here for 4 hours and tell you everything I think about relationships, okay? And it would be impossible to do that and have you stay awake and learn something. So we break them down into small chunks, allow you to grasp them and sleep on it, have a week to explore it, and then we go again. So come on back next week for some of that other stuff. But here's the scripture we're in, is Galatians 6. This is Doing All Good is the title in my Bible. It says this: brothers, if someone is caught in sin, you who are spiritual should restore him gently. If someone's got a gap in their lives and they did that sin and there's this gap here and it's between you and them, you should restore them. How? Say it one more time. Some of you don't understand. Who in the room would go and restore their relationship harshly? And that some of you have tried to restore a relationship harshly. How did that work out? Did it go great? No. So we do this in our relationships with people we want to spend the rest of our life with, but we don't do this with people who sin or sin against us. So you should restore yourself gently, but watch yourself, or you may also be tempted. Don't let someone sin, restore them so gently that you stop calling it sin. that you may be tempted to think that the thing that they did that actually hurt you and created a gap isn't the bad thing. See what I'm saying? And we do this all the time too in the church right now. We have diluted sin so much that you can do anything and get it justified so long as XYZ. Sometimes you sin, which means you fell short and you sinned. And here's the best part. It really doesn't have anything to do with me. This is a you problem. And this is the other thing Christians love to do. We love to come in and be like, well, I told you. Maybe you don't do it that animated, but your spirit feels that, doesn't it? I told you would sin. I told you this would happen. I knew it. And then it's all this point, and they're like, look, I didn't come here to be thrown under a bus. I came here to confess my sin. This is why people don't confess their sins anymore to each other. This is why honestly I feel like the Catholic Church has really nailed confession, because they go to a confessional and they sit and they confess their sin, and someone absorbs that and restores them gently, and then they go out and they fill it back up. I don't know how it works. But the idea of confession is a very biblical idea, and the idea here is like, when's the last time someone came to you and explained to you how they sinned? And how did you react? And some of you got kids. Whoo! It's like double whammy. But you just got to teach them. Or you need to restore them. Let's keep reading. Carry each other's burdens. And in this way you fulfill the law of Christ. If anyone thinks he's something, then he's nothing. And he deceives himself. That's a Pharisaical mindset. I'm better than you because you fell. We forget we are all fall short of the glory of God. Each one of you should test his own actions, and then he can take pride in himself without comparing himself to everyone else, because the thing is that I'm supposed to worry about my gains. I'm supposed to worry about my stuff. I'm not actually supposed to shout across at you and tell you what you need to do. I'm actually supposed to take inventory of this, because it's incredibly easy for me to be me. And where I sin, I'm supposed to be able to invite someone into my life and say, I'm struggling, I'm sinning in this area. And instead of having the book thrown at me, I'm supposed to be able to be restored gently. And I'm supposed to have people that want to carry that burden. You seeing why this is becoming an issue in the world we occupy? Let's keep reading. Each one should test his own actions and then take pride in yourself without comparing yourself to someone else. For each one should carry their own load. This is the other thing. Your sin is not someone else's issue to fix for you. Oh, if there was a pastor in the room, they would have said, amen. They'd have been in the back like, dude, keep going. It is not the pastor's job to fix you. It is not the youth pastor's job to fix your kids. It's their job. It's your job. It is my job to help you understand this. And if I can help you understand this, then maybe I can help you apply this. And if you apply this, you'll do a lot less of that. This is why I think I was a good youth pastor. I think I was a good youth pastor because when people came to me and told me they sinned, I said, sure, that makes sense. You're 17 years old. You got hormones like crazy. The world's telling you to be 100 different things, and you messed up. That makes sense to me. I am less concerned about what you did and more concerned with what you're going to do. And people would be like, how could you do that? Because God's grace is sufficient. And if they're coming to me confessing their sin, I don't have to tell them they did it wrong. They already know. They actually look like they lost sleep, so mission accomplished for everybody out there who wants them to lose sleep, Anyone who receives instruction in the world must share all good things with him, the instructor, with his instructor. Do not be deceived, because God cannot be mocked. This is important. A man reaps what he sows. The one who sows to please his sinful nature, from that nature will reap destruction. The one who sows to please the Spirit, from the Spirit will reap eternal life. Let us not become weary in doing good, for at the proper time we will reap the harvest if we don't give up. Which means it's not going to happen overnight. And it means your road to sanctification is still on. You're still a work in progress. And it's not going to be done until you see Jesus again. And the glory that you can't handle on earth will come when God sits there and looks at you, Mike, and says, I don't know about this cat. And Jesus says, I got him. And the glory of the Lord will say, okay. And maybe when I get up there, he's going to be like, Jay, how many of these guys are you going to let in? You know, you can't keep doing this. He's like, but they went all in on me. Like, that's the thing. That was the deal. And if we just keep working at it, realizing glory doesn't come because you can't handle glory. It's not yours to have, saith the Lord, and you couldn't handle it if you got it. You've got too much of you in you. It's incredibly easy for you to be you. I am thanking God that you are not him. Okay? This is important. Therefore, as we have opportunity, let us do good to all the people, especially those who belong to the family of believers, especially the people who believe in Jesus and they just messed up. Let's take them in and let's do this together. Isn't that weird that we would call a church Mazi? That means together? Isn't it weird that we would be chasing a community of people that can come together and confess their sin? Because it's biblical? And that we can maybe somehow, some way, get rid of this in the gaps? Wouldn't that be amazing? If you don't even have to trust me, but if you trust Jesus and I trust Jesus, that we're playing with the same playbook. That my job when you come to me with sin is to restore you gently. My job when you come to me with something that's burdening you is to carry it with you. My job when you're in it, and it's the hardest day of your life, is to step in it with you. And here's the problem, is the gap gets bigger when you don't let people in. And Dan and I were just talking about, I'm not going to embarrass you, we were just talking about this, that it's like the death of the village. It takes a village was the thing you always hear, oh, it takes a village, Well, the village is dead, and we killed it. Because COVID told us that we could be together and we can make it on our own, and everybody just likes to do their own thing. And oh, by the way, you have something in your pocket that isolates you from people in your life all the stinking time. And it's crazy that you could be in a phenomenal conversation with someone and still take out your stinking phone. I got a whole thing against the whole generation of people putting a phone. It's like, just cut your hand off and put the phone there. You clearly don't want to be here. Because if you wanted to be here, we would maybe have better conversations with each other. We would maybe have more insight as to what you're actually struggling with. And then we would have that weird thing called accountability, which isn't, I come to you and tell you all the things you're doing wrong. It's you come to me and saying, hey, I did the thing wrong. How can I be held accountable? And it's me propping you up and saying, look, I believe in you. And I believe in the God who saved us, that sin is gone, is wiped clean. You don't have to worry. But we got to step into it because you need help. We live in a world where people don't ask for help. And honestly, you feel guilty when you receive help. And I was telling you last week, I'm telling you, man, in my life, it's been the craziest 4 years of our lives. It's been the craziest 4 years of our lives. And people are coming from nowhere and everywhere, and they're helping us. And we're like, why? And you know what response I've gotten more than any other response? Because I love you. What? What are you talking about? We don't even hang out. Well, yeah, but that thing you did for my kid. I remember that one time I was having that rough time and you sat. You know, I just love you. Won't you just let me love you? And I'm over here like, I don't know. I don't deserve this. I don't deserve it. And it keeps happening. And I don't get it. But please don't stop, because it's wild. It's like every day's an adventure, you know? There's really only one way when we get into these conversations to step into step into this. And a lot of times we sin, we bring it to our neighbor. And the thing is that you're not actually bringing it to the neighbor to get their forgiveness. You're bringing it to the neighbor to be reminded of God's forgiveness. That's how you restore someone gently. You restore them by saying, hey, you've been forgiven. You've been set free. Hey, your ledger's not getting bigger. God's grace is getting more abundant. That's the hardest part of the gospel. The hardest part of the gospel is it doesn't make sense. That you could keep sinning and God's grace would keep getting bigger. Paul talks about this. And then he says, but should you just keep sinning? So you can be like, hey, I got the most grace out of everybody in the group. Some of you are like, I'm testing that theory. And he's like, by no means, you shouldn't do that. Because when somebody sends their son to die on the cross to forgive you of your sin, it changes how you engage with the world. It changes your worldview. And when it changes your worldview, that changes your point of view. And when it changes your point of view, it changes your opinions. And when it changes your opinion, it fills in gaps. There's no longer me yelling at you and all the things I think you should do. It's just me trying to walk up to you and try to help you with whatever you're doing. I don't actually have to convict you. You're pretty convicted. So what we're going to do, and this is the only thing that makes the most sense, is we're going to go around and give a microphone to everybody. And you're going to tell us your deepest confession. I'm just kidding. Whoa! Brad, I am not into that. Okay. Start in the back. Is there a front way out of here? I got a call I got to make. Someone just reached their phone. Mom, I got to go. I want to see a church and a generation of people who understand how to do this. And so we're doing an iMarriage series because we're going to talk about relationships. We will get to marriage for those of you who are looking for it. We'll get there. But to have a marriage, you have to start with a relationship. And if we apply the same grace to our brothers and sisters in Christ that we do to our relationships that we love and are married to, I wonder how much better the church would be. And the crazy part is, this is actually how we were told to love each other. Just as Christ laid down his life for the church, just as the groom lays down their life for the bride, we're to love each other that way. That's biblical. And we're not doing that. And so this series is going to hopefully drudge up some of that. Hopefully I'll give you a few tricks and tips on how to keep your marriage tons of fun and have a great relationship in your life. But the most important thing is this. You want to start right now. Build yourself on a firm foundation. Get your insecurities out of the gap and step over the gap and talk to the person and just see what they're up to. Walk toward them. For some of you, you've got a friend that you haven't reached out to in a long time. I'm sorry. And you need to. For some of you, you've got a parent, or you've got a brother or a sister, or somebody did the thing they did the sin thing, and you've held that gap open for so stinking long, then you have had such a hard, rigid reality to that you just need to forgive them and restore it gently. And don't come to me with, well, you don't. If I heard what they did to you, I'd probably feel the same way you do. But we're not called to feel the same way you do. We're not called to keep the gap wide open. We're not called to do that. We're called to restore people gently. We're called to forgiveness, because when Jesus forgave you and you received it, you have to give that to others. That's the game. That's the gospel. The good news is that it doesn't make life any fair. The beauty of grace is that it makes life not fair. And we get to have it. because of Jesus. So we get to extend it because of Jesus. You guys can come up for the band. We've got an encounter moment, and this moment is designed for you to encounter God. We've got communion over here, and that is a self-paced, self-walk through communion. It's like a little Lunchable thing. There's like a little thing. It's hard to figure out. You got to get the thing out the top, and then you open the cup. But it's right there. Up in this area will be prayer. If you want to come to the altar and sit for a minute and be prayed over, you can do that. If you're back there and you're like, I want to be prayed over, but I'm not going up there, all you got to do is raise your hand. Piper will find you. Mike will find you. Somebody will find you and pray for you. And they'll try their best not to scare you when they sneak up, okay? That is a rule we are trying our best to accomplish. But the whole point is this: when you encounter God, some of you have sin you need to confess. I'm not going to throw a microphone around. But man, I really believe that you should confess your sin to somebody. It doesn't have to be one of us. It could be your best friend over coffee. It could be, you will feel life will be better for you if we learn to walk this out as a group of people, following Jesus the best we can. In this room, we've got people from all different types of faith, all different types of backgrounds, all different. Here's the one thing that we all come together and agree on. Jesus is the Savior of the earth. He was crucified by the Roman Empire. He was buried. And 3 days later, nobody could find his body. And then a couple days later, a bunch of people in a locked room said, we saw it. One guy put his fingers through the hands. And then the people that followed him, who were scared for their life that they'd be next, told the whole world about him. And we're still talking about him. I don't care how you grew up. I don't care what you brought in. I don't care what kind of worldview you got, what kind of point of view or opinion. I don't care about any of that. I don't care who you voted for. I don't care about any of that. What I care about is that if you have sin in your life that's causing a gap in your relationships, that you would be restored gently by confessing your sin and having a teammate carry your burden with you. Which means, if you make a decision to do that, and you're the person they do that to, if you're the person they do that to, what is your role? To restore them, to carry their burdens with them. Not to correct them, not to teach them, not to show them the one Bible verse about, no. It's to restore them gently and to step into life with them. Because life is better together. It's better, Mazi. Heavenly Father, thank you. We've got a long way to go on all this, and I hope I didn't mess anybody's relationships up tonight. There's one thing that I want more than anything, and that's for us to be a church, a bride waiting for its groom that is ready for you. And right now, God, I got to believe that we're probably not. And so I really would like for us to be the start of maybe something in this area, maybe the start of a church movement in the area that would become something more than just the people that hang out on a Thursday. It would become this weird community of people who don't actually have a whole lot in common in some areas besides the fact that we come and believe in Jesus. And we're going to do our best to live that life out. So God, I pray that you would go before us for any confession of sin that needs to happen in the room, that you would allow that confession to be beautiful, that we would carry each other's burdens, you would restore us as we try to restore each other. And at the end of the day, that we would remind each other that there was a God who loved us so much that he sent his son, that while we were still sinning, Christ died for us. We give you all the glory, all the praise, in the name of your son, Jesus. Amen.